There is a tax you pay that does not appear on any government statement. It has no official name, no line item, no annual filing. The agency that collects it sends no notices, requires no documentation, and has never been audited. And yet it is one of the most efficiently extracted transfers of wealth in the modern economy, precise, recurring, and almost entirely invisible to the people paying it. It is extracted through a mechanism more sophisticated than legislation, more durable than regulation. It operates through the deliberate engineering of a specific feeling, the feeling that you are slightly, persistently, and correctively less than what you should be, that something about you is insufficient, and that the insufficiency is the cause of whatever is not working in your life. And then, the sale of the correction. This is the insecurity economy, and it is not an accident of capitalism. It is one of its most refined, most lucrative, and most carefully maintained architectures. $1 trillion every year from that gap. Today we are going to trace exactly how that gap was built, by whom, using which tools, and with what level of deliberate intent. Not because understanding it will make you immune to it. The system is too well designed for that. But because partial immunity is available, and it begins here. 1. The problem as product. The architecture of insecurity marketing has a documented origin. It does not begin in the digital age, or with social media, or with the algorithmic economy. It begins in the 1920s, in the offices of copywriters who discovered something that would become one of the most durable principles in commercial history. The most profitable product is not the one that solves an existing problem. It is the one that creates a new one. The Listerine Playbook. Listerine was originally formulated in the 1870s as a surgical antiseptic. It was later marketed as a floor cleaner. It was used as a treatment for gonorrhea. By 1914, it had been repositioned as a mouthwash, but sales were modest. People cleaned their teeth. They did not feel, in any urgent or socially consequential way, that their breath required a commercial solution. Then, Gerald Lambert, one of the company's owners, took over the advertising strategy. He did not invest in improving the product. He invested in the problem. He found the word halitosis in a medical journal, a clinical term for bad breath that existed primarily in professional medical literature, and deployed it in consumer advertising. Not as a medical condition, as a social catastrophe. The advertisements that followed were not selling freshness. They were selling fear. They told stories. The woman who could not understand why her social life was diminishing, until a frank friend told her the truth. The man whose professional advancement had stalled, attributed, subtly, to the same cause. The wedding that almost did not happen. The friendship that was fading. All of it. All of the quiet social erosion that ordinary people feared and could not explain, attributed to a condition they had never worried about before, which happened to be treatable by a product that cost 15 cents. Listerine's sales increased 7,000% within 7 years. Lambert did not discover halitosis. He manufactured its social significance. He took a common, largely inconsequential biological reality and attached to it a structure of social consequence rejection, isolation, professional failure that made its treatment feel urgent, necessary, and morally responsible. He built the anxiety, then sold the relief. The product barely changed. The market expanded by orders of magnitude. The category creation mechanism. What Lambert deployed with Listerine was subsequently formalized by the advertising industry into a repeatable framework. Marketing literature calls it category creation, the establishment of a new need that did not previously exist in the consumer's mind, followed by the positioning of your product as the solution to that need. It proceeds in 4 stages. First, identify or construct a gap between the consumer's current state and a better state they should want. Second, attach social consequence to that gap: rejection, embarrassment, professional failure, romantic abandonment. Third, establish that the gap is widespread but correctable. Many people struggle with this, and they don't even know it. Fourth, present the product as the corrective mechanism, not a luxury, but a necessity. Not a nice-to-have, but a response to a real and consequential problem. The sophistication of modern category creation is that step 1, the identification of the gap, has become proactive rather than reactive. Companies do not wait for consumers to report a problem. They conduct research to find the anxieties that already exist at low intensity, the vague, unnamed dissatisfactions that most people carry without having a vocabulary for them. And then they provide both the vocabulary and the product simultaneously. The word creates the category creates the need creates the market is then owned by whoever coined the word. The role of language is the primary tool of category creation. The shift from feeling tired to adrenal fatigue, from stressed to cortisol dysregulation, from aging skin to collagen depletion and cellular senescence, from anxious to nervous system dysregulation and vagal tone deficiency. Each linguistic upgrade does two things. It medicalizes the experience, framing it as a clinical condition requiring intervention rather than a normal variation of human experience, and it creates a vocabulary that can be searched, shared, and built into content ecosystems that drive perpetual awareness of the problem. The medicalization of ordinary human experience is one of the most lucrative moves in modern marketing. The moment a normal human state, tiredness, social anxiety, visible aging, occasional digestive discomfort, is reclassified as a condition with a clinical name, it acquires a treatment protocol, and treatment protocols have price tags. 2. The digital amplification. Digital media did not invent the insecurity economy, but it achieved something the advertising industry had been attempting to do for a century. It made the delivery of inadequacy personal, continuous, and adaptive. The engagement architecture. Social media platforms are built on an engagement model. Revenue comes from advertising. Advertising revenue correlates directly with time spent on platform and with the emotional intensity of that time, because emotional intensity drives more ad interaction, more content sharing, and more return visits. The research on emotional states and engagement is extensive and largely convergent. Mild negative emotional states, specifically social comparison, inadequacy, fear of missing out, and mild anxiety, produce significantly higher engagement metrics than neutral or positive emotional states. Content that makes you feel slightly worse about your life holds your attention longer than content that makes you feel fine about it. Contentment, as an emotional state, is bad for engagement metrics. The business consequence of this is structural, not conspiratorial. No individual engineer at any social platform sat in a room and decided to make users feel bad. What happened is more mundane and more systemic. Engagement was optimized. Content that drove higher engagement was surfaced more frequently. Content that drove lower engagement was suppressed. Over billions of iterations of this optimization process, the feed learned without anyone explicitly teaching it that inadequacy content performed better than contentment content. The algorithm that emerged from that optimization is, functionally, an inadequacy delivery machine. Not because anyone designed it that way, because that is what the objective function, applied at scale, produced. The influencer supply chain. Into this algorithmic environment entered a new class of commercial actor, the influencer. A person whose personal identity, personal life, and personal aesthetic become the product, and whose audience's aspiration toward that identity, life, and aesthetic becomes the revenue stream. The influencer economy is, at its structural core, a system for making aspirational inadequacy feel personal and authentic. The traditional advertisement is obviously commercial. You know it was paid for. You apply a discount to it. The influencer's recommendation arrives wrapped in the apparent authenticity of personal experience. This changed my life. This is what I actually use. I found this and I had to share it with you. The psychological mechanism is entirely different from advertising, even when the financial mechanism is identical. Research on parasocial relationships, the one-sided emotional bonds viewers form with media figures, shows that these bonds produce something close to trust between friends. The advice is processed not as commercial recommendation, but as personal endorsement. The discount applied to advertising is not applied to the influencer's recommendation, even when the influencer is paid more for that recommendation than the advertiser would have paid for a conventional ad. The Federal Trade Commission requires disclosure of paid partnerships. Disclosure compliance is partial, and even when disclosure is made a small hashtag, A briefly displayed banner, research suggests it has limited effect on how the recommendation is processed. The parasocial trust overrides the legal disclosure. The comparison ratchet social media introduced a new phenomenon that traditional advertising could not replicate: continuous, real-time social comparison against a curated, filtered, and commercially incentivized version of other people's lives. Human beings are social comparison animals. We evaluate our own well-being, success, and adequacy in part by comparing ourselves to others, what is a cognitive mechanism with evolutionary roots. Traditional media provided comparison anchors: the person in the advertisement, the celebrity in the magazine. These were clearly unrealistic reference points, and consumers developed a reasonable ability to discount them. Social media changed the reference class. Now the comparison is not to a celebrity or a model, an obviously exceptional case that the brain can discount. The comparison is to a peer, to someone who, apparently, is living a version of your life but better. Waking earlier, training harder, eating more intentionally, managing their schedule with more discipline, traveling to more interesting places. The peer comparison is not discounted the way the celebrity comparison is, because the implicit premise is, if they can do it, you could too. You are just not doing it yet. The gap between their life and yours is not about exceptionalism, it is about insufficiency, specifically, yours. And into every gap perceived through comparison flows a product positioned to close it. 3. The subscription to insecurity. The most profitable evolution of the insecurity economy is not the one-time sale. It is the subscription, the recurring, automated extraction of payment for ongoing access to a solution for a problem that is never fully resolved. This is a structural feature, not a design flaw. A problem that is solved produces a satisfied customer who stops buying. A problem that is managed, improved, but never concluded produces a perpetual customer. The incentive to fully resolve the problem is, from the seller's perspective, the incentive to end the revenue stream. And so the products that dominate the insecurity economy tend, by design or by fortunate coincidence, to be ones where resolution is always proximate, but never quite arrived at. The skincare industrial complex. The modern skincare industry is perhaps the clearest illustration of this dynamic. A generation ago, a reasonable skincare routine involved a cleanser, a moisturizer, and a sunscreen. This was and remains the evidence-based foundation of skin health. Dermatologists largely agree on these fundamentals. The current market, however, offers not a routine, but an ecosystem. Cleansers differentiated by pH level, ingredient philosophy, and skin microbiome considerations. Toners that are not toners in the traditional sense, but essences, or priming waters. Serums not one, but several, each addressing a separate concern: brightening, firming, hydrating, resurfacing, protecting. Actives: retinol, vitamin C, niacinamide, alpha-hydroxy acids, beta-hydroxy acids, each with its own application schedule. Incompatibilities with other actives that require separate application windows. And a learning curve that can take months to navigate. The complexity is not accidental. A 12-product routine requires 12 monthly replenishments. It creates 12 points of brand loyalty. It generates a body of knowledge and vocabulary skincare as a practice, almost as an identity that makes the consumer an active participant in and advocate for the system. The consumer does not feel like a victim of the complexity. They feel like an expert navigating it. The productivity and self-improvement complex. The productivity industry deserves its own examination because it operates with an added layer of sophistication. It has convinced its customers that consuming it is itself an act of self-improvement. Buying the book, taking the course, subscribing to the newsletter, attending the seminar, these feel like productive activities. They feel like investment in the self. The consumption is experienced as progress. But the structure of the productivity industry systematically ensures that no single framework, system, or methodology is ever final. Each new book identifies a flaw in the previous one. Each new productivity guru's system reveals the insufficiency of the system that preceded it. The consumer who is serious about their productivity is therefore always engaged in the active consumption of new material, not because their life situation has changed and new tools are needed, but because the market has produced a new iteration of essentially the same core insights, repackaged to appear novel. Cal Newport, David Allen, James Clear, Tim Ferriss, Marie Kondo, each offers a framework that is, in its essentials, a variation on the same principles. Focus, eliminate the unnecessary, build systems, be intentional. The core content is not changing at the rate the publishing and course industry suggests it is. The packaging is changing, and each new package implies that the previous one was insufficient, which is why you are still not as productive, as organized, as focused, as effective as you should be. Not because the previous system was bad, because you have not yet bought the current one. The wellness anxiety loop. The wellness industry presents perhaps the most structurally complex version of the insecurity subscription, because it has done something no other consumer category has achieved. It has made the management of anxiety into a product category, and the product category itself generates anxiety. Consider the mental wellness app market. These applications offer meditation, breathing exercises, sleep tools, mood tracking, cognitive behavioral therapy exercises, and anxiety management content. Many of them are genuinely useful. The research on mindfulness-based interventions for mild to moderate anxiety shows real efficacy. These are not fraudulent products. But the subscription model creates a structural paradox. The user's anxiety is the product's market. If the anxiety is resolved, the user cancels the subscription. The incentive for the app is therefore to manage the anxiety, to provide enough relief to maintain satisfaction with the product, without resolving it. Full resolution is the churn event. Ongoing management is the retention event. Additionally, the wellness app ecosystem creates its own sources of anxiety. The sleep tracking app shows you your sleep quality data, and if your deep sleep percentage is below the app's recommended level, you now have something new to be anxious about. The mindfulness app's streak counter means that missing a day produces a specific low-grade guilt that did not exist before the app did. The macro counting app means that eating an unlogged meal is a small act of self-betrayal. The tools for managing anxiety have created new, minor but real sources of anxiety perfectly calibrated to be relieved by continued engagement with the same tools. The subscription audit. Here is a practical exercise. Write down every recurring payment you make to an insecurity-adjacent category: skincare and beauty replenishments, fitness memberships and fitness apps, supplement subscriptions, productivity tools and courses, wellness and mental health apps, clothing subscription boxes, any service that is sold on the promise of making you better, more optimized, more effective, more attractive, or more at ease. Add them up. Monthly, the median middle-class consumer in the United States spends between $300 and $600 per month on this category products and services that are not food, shelter, transportation, or entertainment in the traditional sense, but are the recurring cost of participating in the improvement economy. $300 to $600 a month. $3,600 to $7,200 a year. Then ask a second question for each item. What specifically would it mean for me to no longer need this product? What would the resolution look like? And if you cannot describe a resolution if the product is, by its nature, one you will continue to need indefinitely, regardless of your progress, then what you have is not a solution to a problem. You have a subscription to the management of a problem that the industry has an interest in never fully solving. 4. The anatomy of resistance. Understanding a system is not the same as being free of it. The insecurity economy is too pervasive, too personalized, and too well-funded for any individual to simply opt out of it through awareness alone. The research on advertising effectiveness shows that people who are explicitly aware of the persuasion attempt are still significantly influenced by it. The discount applied to persuasion does not reach 100%, but partial resistance is real, practical, and worth building. And it begins not with rejection, but with calibration. The two questions, before any purchase in the insecurity-adjacent category, two questions are worth asking with genuine deliberateness. The first, what problem does this actually solve? And did I have this problem before I encountered this product's marketing? The gap between a problem you would have identified independently and a problem you became aware of through commercial communication is diagnostic. It does not mean a commercially introduced problem is false. Some things you did not know to look for are real once you look. But the origin of the problem awareness tells you something about whose interest is being served by the diagnosis. The second, what does resolution look like? Is there a version of this in which I have fully addressed the underlying issue and no longer need the product? If yes, and the product credibly progresses toward that resolution, a course of antibiotics for an infection, a specific training program for a specific athletic goal, a financial education resource that genuinely builds durable understanding, then the expenditure is probably investment. If no resolution is articulable, if the product is, by its nature, permanent maintenance, then you are pricing a subscription, not a solution, and you should price it accordingly. The environment design individual willpower applied to a well-designed environment is rarely a winning strategy. The insecurity economy is not a series of individual ads you can individually resist. It is an environment, the feed, the social reference class, the content ecosystem that operates continuously and adaptively. Trying to resist it one impression at a time is the equivalent of trying to eat healthily one meal at a time while living inside a fast food restaurant. The more durable strategy is environmental. Curate the information environment before the information arrives. This is not the same as avoidance. It is the deliberate editing of the reference class. The people you follow, the content you actively engage with versus allow to pass, the social comparisons you are making, and whether you have chosen them or inherited them from an algorithmic default. Research on social comparison shows that the reference class matters as much as the comparison mechanism itself. If your social feed is populated predominantly with aspiration content, the curated best lives of people optimized for presenting a particular image, the comparisons you make are against that reference class. Editing the reference class changes what you compare yourself to. Changing what you compare yourself to changes the gap you perceive. Changing the gap changes the spending the gap generates. The price of the gap. The final calibration worth making is financial. Calculate, as precisely as you can, the annual cost of your insecurity spending, not the categories that genuinely improve your life in ways you would endorse with full information, but the ones that exist primarily because the gap between your current state and a marketed ideal has been engineered to feel urgent. For many people, this number is between $3,000 and $10,000 per year. Across a working life, the compound effect of redirecting even a portion of that spending toward assets, toward the ownership of the things that the insecurity economy is, in its own way, selling you is substantial. Not because deprivation is virtuous, because the most expensive thing you can buy is a recurring solution to a problem that was designed to recur. The insecurity tax is not collected from you against your will. You pay it voluntarily, repeatedly, in the sincere belief that this time, this product, this subscription, this program, this routine will close the gap, that the gap will finally close. It will not. Not because the products do not work. Some of them work very well, but because the gap itself is the product. The gap is maintained, refreshed, and represented with new urgency by an industry whose revenue depends on its persistence. The moment you feel enough, the moment you sit in genuine contentment with your skin, your productivity, your body, your focus, your routine, yourself, you stop being a customer. And that is an outcome the insecurity economy cannot afford. Understanding who designed the gap and what they earn from your recurring belief in it does not make you immune to the feeling. The feeling is human. What changes is your relationship to it, the moment between the feeling and the purchase, where information lives. That moment is worth defending. It is the most expensive real estate in modern commerce, and the industry has spent $1 trillion trying to eliminate it. Tax yourself a little less. The most profitable product ever invented is inadequacy. The second most profitable is its cure. The company sells you both.